Hey y'all, thanks for having me. This is Finding Beauty in Mundane. I am Megan Tew. Hello. I'm a senior software engineer at CallRail, and I'm one of the co-organizers of the Atlanta chapter of Rails Girls. And you can also find me at Megan Tew on Twitter, GitHub, most internet places. So by this title, I mean that as software developers, we can't love every part of our jobs, right? Some things that we do are just less fun than others. They're boring or tedious, but they're necessary, right? So how can we love our jobs more? I think the key is to focus on empathy. And when we're constantly mindful of the people that are touching our code or our software and what their needs are, we'll build better systems for everyone. Because at the end of the day, all computer problems are people problems. And if we start solving our computer problems like we solve our people problems, we'll develop better connections with our users and our teams. When you love your team, you love your work. So we'll explore this idea of empathetic software a bit more in depth over the course of this talk so that every day at work, you can be more fulfilled and be more happy. And the reason it's important for us to address our feelings about these mundane parts of development is to combat technical debt. And we've all got it. Most of us don't have time to deal with it. But the reality is that we can't constantly be churning out huge, new, exciting features. It's not a sustainable pace. And we get hit with a good dose of reality when our applications start breaking under the weight of our tech debt. And as we grow as developers, it's important to learn the value of resolving tech debt, keeping in mind the reason we're doing this in the first place. Because what we do as developers is much more than code, or best practices, or prestige. It's about respect for our teammates, current and future. It's especially about respect for our users and for ourselves. And at the end of the day, when we learn to love our work, hopefully our teams can be happier and work better together. So how can we change our perspective on these less fun parts of development? I'm gonna cover 4 different tasks that we could probably all stand to like a little bit more and how we can change our mindset about them. So the first, updating our dependencies. As Noel said, it's a pretty important thing to do. So whether you're updating your gems or updating your apps to run on a new Rails version, it's not something we like, but why? So maybe your gem file is better measured in like feet than lines. And maybe running bundle update Rails creates a never-ending cascade of red bundler text, and you just don't know where to start. And there's the concern, if things are running well, why upgrade, right? We get more secure applications. Our users want their data to be secure, but outdated gems are a huge risk. And when you're updating patch versions, it's an easy way to combat this. They're low risk and high reward. You're likely not to see any potential breakages, only bug fixes. And if you're trying to get more into OSS, updating dependencies is a great way to get more exposure to the community. So as you're tracking down issues with new versions that you might be having, and you're reading change logs, you'll be more familiar with the tools and places that conversations are taking place. So that when you're ready to contribute back to open source, you know where to go. And I think pretty importantly, it gives us use of supported versions. So you've got support from the teams that are actually maintaining these libraries. Using a current version means that there's probably going to be someone else there to help you out when you've got a bug. Otherwise, if you're still using Rails 4.1 and you find a major security issue, what else are you gonna do? You're gonna fork it, and then it's on you. And it actually feels really good to be more in tune with your system and the greater community and the applications that are better and more secure for our users. It's also important for us to tackle writing documentation. So usually this is one where we know we should have it, but we usually don't have enough docs, if any at all, in our organizations. And why don't we really like writing docs? So that can be tedious, right? But if you're used to thinking in computer languages for the better part of your day, why switch context? That can be an additional burden when you're just trying to get your work done, right? And the thing is, docs help spread knowledge. And we know knowledge is power, right? But especially in the context of complicated systems that we need to work together to try to understand. Docs help prevent silos. And without good documentation, knowledge stays concentrated in the brains of those that built a feature. But with documentation, anyone can go and read about how something works. They actually even help make onboarding easy. So new devs spend less time digging for answers, or worse, like clues to where those answers might be, and then they just like keep digging ad infinitum. And aiding in onboarding is just one way that documentation helps other people. From preventing unnecessary digging to letting people look up answers on their own and giving independence, your team will be more independent and productive with documentation, including yourself when you forget how a feature that you wrote works in a few months. As we can see, documentation writing is a concrete way to help other people that are touching our code and using our systems. And we use a little bit of empathy. We have direction and purpose in writing our documentation. We know who we're writing them for and why. And by writing docs, we empower other people. We say, this is yours too. We share this knowledge with each other. So maybe you don't have a lot of documentation in your organization. Where can you start? I like to make a glossary of common terms, so like that are specific to your business, your organization, and then define how they're used in the code base. Makes it really easy to follow the conversation early for new hires and know terms relative to the system so that they can understand what everybody else is already talking about and start contributing earlier. Another great thing is to comment your code as you write it. So like, as Noel mentioned, the added context you get when you're like writing your code as you're writing your documentation is great. If you're making a new class, just go ahead and add a top-level comment describing what it is, how it's used, and why. And then go ahead and do the same thing for your new methods, how they're used and why. Not everything is going to need that same level of documentation, like a method summing up like numbers probably isn't going to need it, but like use your own judgment there. And there are tools like Yard that turn your code comments into navigable documentation. It's really valuable because when you have that navigable documentation, that source of knowledge to specifically point to your new developers to, they'll be pretty ecstatic. Because our jobs are to solve hard problems, not spend valuable resources deciphering spaghetti systems. It feels good to have the basics laid out for you so that you can be more effective at your job quicker. Another way we can build better systems for happy developers, I think, is linting. So why lint? Why don't we like it? It's really tedious, right? Especially when you see something like this. This is a real count of Robocop offenses from a previous project I worked on. And like a number of offenses that large seems pretty insurmountable. Like, what benefit could you possibly have to dealing with that? Actually, I think it's an opportunity for a quick win. So if you go file by file, it'll feel like nothing. Just like when you're updating your gems, like if you break it down into smaller parts, it's totally doable. So if you lint a file, PR it, and then just keep going, you'll have like work shipping on a regular basis. And it doesn't take that long to do if you're just going through one short file. Linting is also an easy way to learn best practices. So if you're just getting started with development, linters are a really great way to know how you're doing. Because they're built on community-created style rules, writing your code with the help of linters will ensure that your work conforms to those commonly agreed upon practices. And it's really helpful when no one's ever told you what your code should look like. I really recommend that new developers that I talk with take at least a look at linters and run their code through one just to see how it works. It also helps us give a more consistent code base. So when all your code conforms to the same style rules, it'll be much easier to read. The developers on your team won't get whiplash like from going one file to the next because they're written in totally different ways. Instead, it'll be seamless and your code will flow, trust me. And you get a much better development experience. One way to really help with this is establishing a style guide at your organization. So sit down with your team and decide how you'd like your code base to look. New code won't raise nearly as many linter errors because you've decided to write your code in a certain way. And you can tune your linters to the rules that your team agrees on. So if you're using Robocop, you can have like your own million-line long Robocop YAML file, and it'll be custom to your organization. And you finally get here, and your code base is cleansed. And it's a hell of a lot more consistent. It's easier for new teammates to get working in your applications because they'll know how the system's supposed to work without having to get caught up in, wait, why did we use this syntax here, but it's different over there? And using a little empathy reminds us that how we can take this small process, linting, and use it to make our teammates' lives easier. So our final task for the day is refactoring. Big or small, within a file or across multiple classes. You could just be changing syntax or overall architecture. Why don't we tend to like refactoring? Well, for one, it can be really hard, right? Especially for those bigger architectural refactors. Why refactor a bunch of old, complicated code when you can be writing new features elsewhere or maybe even on top of it, right? For one, sometimes it's just necessary. And a sign of this is that you're spending all day staring at a file just trying to figure out what it does. I think it's pretty safe to say that we all want readable code. Again, our jobs are to solve hard problems, not spend valuable time and resources deciphering spaghetti code. If possible, we should always take the opportunity to make our and our teammates' lives easier. And I actually think it's pretty cool. So when it comes to Ruby, refactoring is the closest we have to visual art, especially for like back-end developers like me that rarely, if ever, touch the user interface. And as we cut up and move around and transform our code, we're artists. So the next time you're refactoring, picture your code as paint and the files as a canvas. We can take this method that finds the first in prime numbers and just trying to read it. It's like, okay, there's a bunch of conditionals. We're gonna do some different things here. There's a for loop. We're in Ruby, right? All right. But with just a few short steps, like, it's so much shorter, it's so much cleaner, and you can really easily tell what this is supposed to be doing. Now the next person to come along doesn't have to sit for a while trying to decipher what this method does. And by refactoring, we are showing respect for our teammates and their time. It feels really tangible, too. I can take this thing and move it around and play with it and get a prettier result. And it fills me with this like wonderful sense of joy. When I finish a big refactor, it's kind of like everything is wonderful and I have to take a minute and marvel the beauty that I created. Because I made something nice out of something ugly, right? I think code's beautiful, and software is too. And getting to make it is a gift. And I feel really lucky to do this for a living, and I hope you do too. So, wrapping up, the question we originally set out to answer, how can we love our jobs more? Well, we updated our dependencies, and we made our apps more secure for our users and what they need. We wrote documentation, and we empowered everyone on our team with knowledge about our systems. We linted, and we created a consistent code base for minimal context switching, and we refactored to make our code easier to read for the next person that comes along. All of these were possible with a little empathy. But change takes time, right? Like, this isn't some grand tale about forcing your coworkers to love upgrading Rails. If I could do that in one fell swoop, I would be a hypnotist and not a developer. But instead, it's about finding ways to enjoy our work a bit more, little by little. I can say that it takes empathy, right? The common thread for reasons to do all the tasks we've covered is to help other people. And they help our applications too along the way. When we're constantly mindful of who else is touching our code and our software and what their needs are, we'll build better systems for everyone. And we and our teams will be happier to use them too. Because I'm a firm believer that we build better software through empathy. But that's not all. It pays to be positive. These boring parts of development are actually kind of my favorite. I can do little things to help my fellow developers in countless ways. And I choose to be optimistic about what we can accomplish, what kind of great change we can bring together through good development practices. And because I believe I can make these good changes, I just go out and I do them. And it's so much less daunting when you have a positive attitude. So I encourage you to too. And you can spread these tactics to the other folks that you know. You'll be a hero on your team when you tackle these tasks, but you don't have to be the only one. Together we can make big changes for the better, step by step. So go love yourself, love your team, and love your software. Thank you. Again, I'm Megan Tu. I'll be tweeting these slides out later. Come find me, say hello. I'll be around the conference. Thank you.